The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the crunch of boots against gravel as soldiers moved in a swift, disciplined formation. Their orders had been clear: search, detain, and question anyone crossing the border without authorization. She had been spotted, a lone figure walking in the shadow of the forest, her clothes torn and dusty, her face hidden beneath a hood. Without hesitation, the squad surrounded her, rifles pointed, commands barked. She raised her hands slowly, trembling, her eyes darting nervously between the armed men. One soldier shoved her forward, her knees buckling as they restrained her wrists with rough, unyielding rope. She didn't resist, not a word passed her lips. She looked like any other trespasser, perhaps a spy, perhaps someone carrying secrets across enemy lines. Their commander ordered a search. They tore the bag from her shoulders, scattering a few worthless belongings: a flask of water, a tattered notebook, and a scarf that smelled faintly of smoke. Nothing suspicious, nothing dangerous, but still, suspicion lingered in the air. "Remove the sleeve," the commander demanded, his voice like steel. The soldiers grabbed her arm and yanked the fabric upward. At first, they saw only pale skin, bruised and dirt, stained. Then one soldier froze, his breath catching in his throat. His eyes widened as recognition set in. On the inside of her forearm was a tattoo, bold, intricate, unmistakable. It wasn't just ink, it was a mark that carried weight, a symbol known to every man in uniform. The room, once buzzing with tension, suddenly went still. The tattoo was the emblem of the legendary Resistance Battalion, the very one that had vanished years ago, spoken of only in hushed whispers around campfires. It was said that this unit had fought with unshakable courage, sacrificing everything to protect innocent lives. Their symbol wasn't just a design, it was a badge of honor, an oath that had been carried into battles that shaped the very soil beneath their feet. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, their weapons lowering almost instinctively. She wasn't just anyone. She bore the mark of those they had been taught to respect, even if their paths had never crossed. The commander stepped forward, his hardened expression flickering with something unfamiliar. Hesitation. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, though his voice was less steady now. She lifted her eyes and for the first time spoke. Her voice was quiet, yet it carried strength, the kind that came from surviving more than most could imagine. "I didn't get it," she said firmly. "I earned it." The words struck them harder than any bullet. They looked at her anew, no longer as a prisoner, but as someone tied to a legacy they had grown up hearing about. Many of these young soldiers had fathers or uncles who once fought alongside that battalion, men who had told stories of bravery, of last stands and impossible victories. This tattoo wasn't decoration, it was history written on skin. One soldier, barely older than 20, whispered, "My father." He spoke of them. He said the ones with this mark saved his unit from being wiped out. His voice shook as he lowered his rifle completely. Another muttered, "It can't be. They all died." Her lips curved into a faint, tired smile. "Not all," she replied, and in that moment, every soldier felt the ground shift beneath their feet. The commander wrestled with his duty. Orders were orders, and yet what stood before him was no ordinary detainee. She was a survivor of legends, a remnant of a forgotten war. To drag her in as a criminal felt almost sacrilegious. He studied her face. There was weariness, scars of battles both seen and unseen, but there was also resilience, unbroken and undeniable. "Why are you here?" he finally asked, his voice softer. Her gaze dropped to the dirt, then back to him, steady and unflinching. "Because there's another war coming," she said, "and you'll need me more than you know." The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. Some of the men shifted uneasily, their minds torn between fear and awe. They had been ready to lock her away, but now it felt like they were standing in the presence of someone who carried centuries of loyalty on her shoulders. The commander exhaled slowly, lowering his hand from his weapon. The ropes were cut, her wrists red and raw were freed. None dared to touch her again. The soldiers who only minutes ago had seen her as a threat now stepped back as though making space for something far greater than themselves. Respect wasn't commanded, it was earned, and she had earned it long before they were even soldiers. As she rubbed her wrists, she looked around at the faces watching her. Some were curious, some doubtful. but all carried a spark of something new, hope, perhaps, or reverence. She nodded once. "If you want to live through what's coming, remember this symbol," she said, touching the tattoo. "It's not just mine. It's a promise, and promises are meant to be kept." Then, without waiting for permission, she picked up her belongings from the dirt, slung the torn bag over her shoulder, and began to walk away, not toward the forest this time, but straight through the line of soldiers. None stopped her. Their commander gave no order. They simply watched, as though in the presence of a ghost reborn, a fragment of history walking into the future. When she disappeared into the mist, one soldier broke the silence. "Sir, what do we do now?" The commander's eyes remained fixed on the path where she had vanished. His jaw clenched, his voice low but certain. "We remember who she is, and we prepare." That night, not one of them slept easily. For the image of her tattoo, etched in their memories, burned brighter than any fear of punishment. They had detained her without hesitation, but when they saw her tattoo, they realized they had touched the untouchable. And in that realization, the course of their lives and perhaps the fate of their war had shifted forever. Soldiers are trained to follow orders without hesitation, to move with precision, to see danger before it unfolds, and to treat the unknown with suspicion. That night, under a moon hidden by restless clouds, a squad marched through the dense silence of the forest along the border. Their mission was simple: stop anyone attempting to cross, detain them, and bring them in for questioning. For hours, the night was empty. No voices, no movements, until a shadow emerged from the trees. It was a woman, her steps uneven, her body wrapped in a torn cloak, her hood pulled low as if hiding from the very air. The soldiers saw her, and like machines honed for war, they surrounded her in seconds. Weapons were raised, orders shouted, and within a heartbeat her wrists were bound with rope. She did not resist, did not fight, did not plead. She stood with a strange calm, eyes lowered, as if she had already seen the end of this moment. To the soldiers, she was another trespasser, another nameless figure in a long line of suspicious wanderers. But fate had hidden something on her skin, something they were not prepared for. When the commander stepped forward and ordered a search, they pulled her bag away, scattering only meager belongings to the dirt. A small flask, a worn scarf, a notebook so battered it looked older than she was. Nothing dangerous, nothing worth a second glance. Yet the commander, hardened by years of suspicion, barked another order: roll up her sleeve. The cloth resisted before it tore under their hands, and there, etched on her forearm, was a mark that turned the air cold. It was a tattoo, sharp lines, bold ink, a symbol not of rebellion but of legend. The soldiers froze. Every eye widened, every hand holding a weapon wavered. They knew this emblem. Every child who had grown up in the shadow of war knew it. It belonged to the Resistance Battalion, the unit whose stories were carved into the bones of their land. Fathers spoke of them in hushed reverence. Elders told of their sacrifice. Commanders still measured courage against their name. That battalion had been wiped out years ago, or so history claimed. To bear that tattoo was not to boast of art, but to carry a sacred oath. The woman raised her eyes then, and for the first time she spoke. Her voice, though quiet, carried the weight of a storm. "I didn't get this," she said, steady and unbroken. "I earned it." The words cracked something inside the men. They stared not at a prisoner, but at a ghost made flesh, a living fragment of stories they thought belonged only to the past. One young soldier whispered, his voice trembling, "My father said they saved his life. That battalion, they gave everything." Another muttered, almost to himself, "They were all killed. They had to be." She met his gaze, her lips curving into the faintest, most defiant smile. Not all. That truth struck them harder than any weapon could. The commander, who had never once wavered in his duty, found himself unable to look at her as an enemy. His eyes searched her face, scarred by survival, hardened by trials beyond imagination, and he saw not weakness but endurance, the kind that does not die with battles lost. His voice, once a blade, softened into something uncertain. "Why are you here?" he asked, She stepped forward, the ropes on her wrists digging red marks into her skin, and answered with a conviction that silenced every doubt. Because there's another war coming, and whether you believe me or not, you will need me. The forest seemed to lean in, the very earth holding its breath. The soldiers lowered their weapons, the rope was cut, and though their hands had once been eager to bind her, now they dared not even brush her skin. She stood among them, free, and yet more untouchable than any commander. They watched as she picked up her scattered belongings, every movement deliberate, every gesture carrying the weight of someone who had walked through fire and returned carrying the flames. She turned back to them once, touching the ink on her arm. "This mark is not just mine," she said. "It is a promise, and promises are not forgotten." Then she walked straight through their ranks, her head high, her steps steady, vanishing into the mist as though she had always belonged to another world. The soldiers did not stop her. They could not. Their commander gave no orders. He stood frozen, his mind torn between the iron grip of duty and the undeniable truth that some orders must bow to history itself. When she was gone, the silence left behind was heavier than gunfire. Finally, a soldier broke it with a quiet, uncertain voice. "Sir, what do we do now?" The commander stared at the path she had taken, his jaw clenched, his heart beating with something he could not name. His voice, though low, was firm. "We remember who she is, and we prepare." That night, none of them slept. They lay awake with her words burning in their ears, with the image of that tattoo seared into their memory. They had bound her without hesitation, just as they had been taught, just as they had been ordered. But the moment they saw that ink, they realized they had not captured a trespasser. They had stood in the presence of a promise, a survivor of legends, and perhaps the one who would decide the fate of the battles to come.